The Philippines is a country in Asia that has rather large economic and social disparities. A concrete example illustrating this fact is the number of urban poor living in settlements that are unfit for human habitation. According to official data, in Metro Manila alone, there are 558,000 families living in slums, or more than 3 million people. These urban poor survive by working in the informal sector, and their lives are a perpetual struggle.
In our province, no job opportunity in our province. So we come in Manila because there are so many factories here. In Nabotas, there are so many jobs here. Unlike in the province, no job, no work.
Struggling to find opportunity, work, and income, many people come to the center of the country, only to find that Metro Manila is not a heaven for the poor. Many communities are unable to access basic public services and have to buy water and tap electricity at expensive rates. There are no streets or drainage systems, and children lack educational opportunities. Even worse is that the settlements that they pioneer may be shut down through evictions. However, scenes of life from the slums in Metro Manila are not just those of sadness, because courage, power, and dignity of the poor have also been created there too. Going back to the period at the beginning of the 1970s, the systematic organizing of the poor to build up their power was begun in the slums of Tondo along Manila Bay. It was an area where more than 30,000 poor families were living. There, with the support of the Philippines Ecumenical Committee for Community Organization, ZOTO, or the Zone 1 Tondo Organization as it was originally known, was born, together with community organizing work along the lines of Saul Alinsky, with the American Presbyterian minister Herbert White as the trainer. ZOTO was a people's organization that worked to organize the masses. It analyzed social problems and seized on concrete issues to mobilize. Its strategy was to confront state power directly. Achievements during the first phase of ZOTO included being able to submit demands related to the problem of land to Pope Paul VI, carrying out an occupation of state land, and successfully opposing the granting of a land concession in Tondo to the Cement Association of the Philippines. ZOTO encountered a more heated battle when President Marcos declared martial law in 1972. The people's rights and liberties were severely curtailed, and the students, workers, and peasants' movements were suppressed. As for Tondo, because the government had a plan to expand the port, communities became subject to violent forced eviction. Leaders of the struggle were swept up, threatened, and tortured. ZOTO's struggle was one with multiple tactics, such as meeting with a representative of the World Bank, which was providing capital to support the government's port expansion project, in order to explain the impact the project would have on the poor, or marching and demonstrating in 1974 until a seat at the negotiating table with President Marcos was secured. As a result of this struggle, the Philippine government in the end had to allocate around 430 hectares of land in and around Tondo for a housing project that would accommodate approximately 30,000 slum families. This is not even to mention the impact that ZOTO had in broader circles, stimulating urban poor organizations in various Asian countries to learn about establishing organizations of the poor. After the era of ZOTO, urban poor organizations in the Philippines joined together with the People's Power movement to topple the Marcos dictatorship in 1986. After that, a democratic environment was restored once again. In the period of President Corazon Aquino, a strong group of the urban poor pressed forward with the demand for the right to secure land and housing with a proposal for urban land reform. The National Congress for Urban Poor Organization was established to advocate for an end to evictions and to demand land security, and to use the 1987 Constitution, which was adopted as a result of advocacy by the people sector, for beneficial purposes, especially the Articles on Social Justice and Human Rights. Therefore, an important benchmark in the struggle in the era of Corazon Aquino was the push for the Philippine Congress to pass the Urban Development and Housing Act, which is a law protecting the housing rights of the urban poor. A network of the urban poor came together under the name Urban Land Reform Task Force, supported by an important civil society organization, the Bishops' Businessmen's Conference. The Urban Land Reform Task Force used a multitude of strategies to get this law passed by Congress, whether drafting a people's version of the bill, writing letters to members of Congress, becoming subcommittee members to defend the content of the bill, lobbying politicians, or holding demonstrations to mount pressure and campaigning in the streets. As a result of all of this, combined with the support of Cardinal Jaime Sin, the Urban Development and Housing Act was passed by the Philippine Congress and signed into law by President Corazon Aquino on 24 March 1992. Gaining a law that protected the housing rights of the poor, it looked as if the path of struggle of Filipino slum dwellers had led to success. But this was not to be the case. Because of negotiations and compromises made with groups of landowners, the Urban Development and Housing Act is still not a law for genuine urban land reform. The condition stating that the state must arrange resettlement areas that are appropriate with basic public infrastructure prior to evicting communities is not met, and, in reality, most resettlement areas are located outside of the city, far away from the places where the slum dwellers originally worked, because the land there is cheaper.
Most of these people were relocated from the Metro Manila, which is the city, and now we are in the province. The problem is, as you can see, the low-cost housing is not so safe. Flooding all the time. We are surrounded by rivers. The houses here are sitting in a fault line, and flood comes to this place every now and then. And one thing more, the livelihood is not good because there is no specific jobs for people. They have no choice but to come here when the government relocated them, when their houses were demolished. They will just being brought here and nothing.
I think the main obstacles in the implementation of the UDHA is one, in the land inventory of the government. After the law was passed, the government did not make a land inventory or did not make available the land, especially the public land, so that it can be identified inside the city, so that it can be made available for the socialized housing projects inside the city. So no lands was made available by the government. What they did was they looked for lands outside the city. supposedly they should make an inventory, but they did not do that provision of the law.
In addition, the law has a loophole for evictions without having to wait for a court order in the case of communities residing in areas that the state considers to be danger zones, public places, as well as areas where infrastructure projects will be constructed. Therefore, even though there is an Urban Development and Housing Act, Filipino slum dwellers are still faced with evictions and resettlement to areas outside of the city. In 2007, Chairman of the Metropolitan Manila Development Authority, Bayani Fernando, was excessively committed to removing slums from the city. Communities residing alongside canals, rivers, and roadways were put under pressure to be demolished and removed. Urban Poor Associates monitored the situation and found that from 2004 to 2008, more than 90,000 slum families living along the railway had their houses demolished and were relocated to resettlement areas outside of the city in order to make way for the North Rail-South Rail linkage project, which has become notorious for corruption and to this day has not moved forward in implementation. Or, if we want to talk about the present situation, these are the concrete things that we see. On 6 to 7 June 2011, 174 households in Morales Padre community in Pasig City were forcefully evicted. 14 leaders were arrested, and more than 100 families in the community were pressured to move to a resettlement area outside of the city. At present, another 34 households have scattered to find shelter around the area of the original community. In R10 community, close to the port of Navotas, more than 1,500 families are currently being notified by the Department of Public Works and Highways that they must demolish their homes and move away to make way for a road widening project, even though the Department of Public Works and Highways could modify its plan and construct the project on the opposite side without having an impact on the community.
Eviction, nag-umpisa nung ibinaba yung threat sa amin ng eviction, yung sa DPWH, nagbaba sila ng the threat of eviction started when the DPWH conducted and they told to the organization that and to the people that in 2012 the R10 must be clean because they need the land for industrial zone. And the implementator of this project is the Department of Public Works and Highways. The people they want to stay here because they develop the area, and yet the livelihood is in peaceful. All of them are generate their income from peaceful through fishing.
In Manila, it's the same. Delpan community, which has been located on the Pasig River for over 20 years, has received a notice of eviction from the Pasig River Rehabilitation Commission because the government wants to improve the landscape in this area.
Last 2 weeks ago, we have PRRC and LIAC, Local Interaction Commission, came here, and they said that they are having a demolition because they have a project by Lenin Park, and 54 families here.
As for communities that have not yet been evicted, it is not the case that life is secure if the poor are still unable to obtain land security. Baseco is a community settlement located close to the port on around 55 hectares of land. It is home to more than 10,000 slum families. Over the last 10 years, fire has broken out in Baseco 6 times, raising suspicions about whether there is a plan to evict the community, since there have been efforts made by the state to change the status of Baseco into a commercial area. In order to gain security from being subject to eviction, the residents of Baseco are struggling to demand that the government issue them land title deeds, now that the land has been proclaimed for social housing.
There is a program which is what we call security of tenure. The activity of the security of tenure is about how we avail the right each of people in Baseco for titling its family. That is the main objective of the neural program.
We want to continue talking to the government and present the idea of the people how we can unite with the government to get the title. But in other matters, if we are not entitled to get, what are the other options? How to maintain here, like lease of contract for 50 years and use of truck for 50 years. It depends on the government and how we can still here for long life.
Therefore, in order to bring about genuine urban land reform in Philippine society, Task Force Anti-Eviction, which was established in 2007 through the coming together of COPE, UPA, CO Multiversity, and the people's organizations in their work areas, has campaigned and mobilized to stop the eviction of communities and demand that the government arrange housing in the city for the poor, whereby it might be construction on the original site or finding in-city resettlement areas for the construction of housing projects. Task Force Anti-Eviction adheres to principles of community organizing following the approach of Saul Alinsky. Their activities reached an important pace in the period during the presidential election campaign in 2010, when they joined together with many other urban poor organizations and established the Urban Poor Alliance, or UPALL, to demand that presidential candidate Noynoy Aquino sign a covenant with the poor on the issue of policy to solve the problems of the urban poor. On 6 March 2010, more than 10,000 slum dwellers packed into the Delpan Sports Center. Their 10 demands were handed over to Noynoy to sign. These demands included proposals to stop evictions, create land security by building on-site housing, and in-city relocation. When the poor work hard, it is difficult for politicians to campaign irresponsibly. After being elected president, the Urban Poor Alliance followed up by holding Noynoy to his promise, leading to a meeting with the president on 23 December 2010. What followed after that was
because we have a covenant with the president. President Noynoy Aquino includes our demands for security of tenure. That's why he has releasing 10 billion funds for the improvement and development of the urban poor informal settlers, especially in the danger areas.
Well, at first we've been negotiating with the government, regarding the plan for the on-site, and from the Tricor we had the Esteros, and then we had the Nabotas, and then we had the Floodway. The first few months were really good because they allowed us to present our proposal and things that we have to do, like the census and the, knowing the number of people and the type of development, etc. And we were able to pressure the government to come up with a budget. So we had a dialogue with the DBM. And the DBM said that the project is if the project is good, we can really sort of get the president to agree with this. And I think he has been talking with the president, and that's why they came up with the 10 billion for the waterways.
On 10 August 2011, the policy on constructing on-site housing and in-city relocation became clearer when President Aquino announced the provision of 50 billion pesos in budgetary support for a 5-year housing project for 100,000 slum families in Metro Manila. For 2011 to 2012, the government has authorized a budget of 10 billion pesos for 20,000 slum families residing in danger areas, such as alongside canals or rivers. The budget will support housing projects in pilot areas in 3 cities, namely Manila, Quezon City, and Pasay, and the Department of Interior and local government will be the head in coordinating with people's organizations and NGO groups. With the policy proclaimed and the budget arriving, what remains to be done is to make people settlement plans that can be submitted to the government for approval. In the slum areas alongside canals where the Tri-Corps group is working, most of the communities will submit on-site upgrading plans involving shifting inward from the side of the canal to allow 3 meters clearance. They will also design row houses, or, if not, 5-story medium-rise buildings because they do not want to relocate to outside of the city.
Who live in the Estero here is that, especially in the Estero de San Miguel, Estero de Quiapo, and Estero de San Sebastian, is the Palafox housing design, which was done by the famous architect John Felino Palafox. He's a known city planner, and with this beautiful housing, which he especially designed for the Estero, was done for humanitarian reason for the Estero dwellers of Estero de San Miguel. And we're planning to build the housing along the stretch of the Estero. But first, architect Palafox wants to be sure that the soil along the Estero would be stable. So before building the structure, the soil stability will be done first.
The process of making settlement plans begins with gathering the views of the people regarding their housing needs, such as the characteristics of the houses they want to have, the physical environment, and flood prevention mechanisms. From then on, it is technical work. Architects and engineers have a role at this point. After coming up with a concrete settlement plan, a big meeting is convened to present the plan to state agencies in the civil society sector. The process ends with advocating and campaigning for the government to approve the settlement plan as proposed by the community. At present, one community that is considered to have a rather complete settlement plan is San Miguel, Barangay 412, Zone 42, which is situated on a limited area alongside a canal. Together with Palafox Associates, residents of San Miguel have designed new 2- and 3-story model houses to accommodate approximately 128 resident households. Implementation will involve a budget for construction of around 282,000 pesos per unit, which will be repaid by the residents at a rate of 940 pesos per month for 30 years. This is an important turning point in the struggle of the Philippine urban poor. If successful, it would create a new culture in solving the housing problem of the poor, because they could settle down securely and develop their quality of life in the city, breaking free from the cycle of being evicted and driven out of the city, then having to find a way to come back to work and becoming a slum dweller all over again. However, it is not the case that the path of the disadvantaged is smooth now that they are designing their settlements. The Philippine National Housing Authority is also busy with presenting its settlement plan to the government. It is a plan proposing a project for in-city relocation involving the construction of 5-story medium-rise buildings with 24 square meter units. The average cost per unit is 500,000 pesos, which would be repaid over 30 years. However, there are serious doubts about whether slum dwellers could shoulder the burden of having to pay back this much money. Furthermore, the National Housing Authority's plan does not include a single case of on-site construction of housing. In addition, the local government's approach to solving the problem appears to be in opposition to the national government's policy. According to a report in the Philippine Inquirer dated 5 November 2011, Quezon City has a plan to demolish the houses of more than 4,000 slum families living alongside canals and rivers and near roads, and relocate them to Montalban in Rizal Province and San Jose del Monte in Bulacan Province, which are both outside of Metro Manila. The question is therefore, to what extent will the Philippine government's policy to construct on-site housing and have in-city relocation be possible in practice?
I think that's the main obstacle, because NHA, they have a different program. The program is city relocation. They keep on developing relocation site outside of Manila, and when that's ready, what they do is they encourage people to go there, which should not be. And then the mayors have a different way of thinking also, so they would like to have an MRB. And so if they have, like this one in Quezon City, what he's saying is if the people who are staying along the waterways cannot be put there, then we really have to go to Payatas and other areas, because he feels that the setbacks or the easement in the near the steros are not buildable, so you cannot build houses there. So what he's saying, so I'm preparing like lands available so that we can transfer these people in city. But what we're saying is you have not tried to study where the people are, the condition of the land, etc., and all that, and you're already preparing another solution.
Possible to do on-site everywhere, and it might be difficult to find land for in-city. So there are some instances where you do off-city. But let's say, for instance, the San Jose del Monte site. Government is planning to put up an MRT line that goes up to that relocation site. So effectively, probably soon it will be an in-city relocation site. But basically, we would like to consider on-site if it's possible, then in-city if it's not possible, then resettlement as the last option. You know, yesterday I called up Mayor Lim because I think that there is some concern on Estero de San Miguel, and I told him that there is money already. So his proposal is in-city, not on-site. But then that is something that needs to be negotiated, and this requires really strong urban poor organization, because if we have strong urban poor organizations, then they can argue that this is a workable and viable option for them.
So this is the challenge. However, slum dwellers who are committed to the principle of housing rights will not just wait around to be given directions by the state. Instead, they will try to determine their own future, a future that is built upon the foundation of land and housing justice.
Submission, upon completing all the technical aspects, all the documentation for the socialized housing along the steros, we will submit it to the President. Now, if the President will not allow us, will not permit this housing design, this housing proposal, or this housing project along the steros, definitely we will not allow that to happen. We will mobilize. We will let the government know that this is what the people want. We will gather the media to be heard. Let the media broadcast through radio, through broadsheets, and even through television that this is what the people want. We want this housing project to come into reality. And by doing this, we will do everything to let the government be pressured that this is what the poor people want. And I think this is the time for the Philippine government to really look into the reality that relocation is not a solution for these stero dwellers.
The opinion of this leader from San Miguel community, Barangay 412, Zone 42, clearly concludes that there is no alternative for Philippine slum dwellers other than to come together and join forces if they want both land in the city and dignity at the same time.
Baka pagkamalan